Welcome to Impacting Your Future, a podcast from WheatSay UK with me, Rosa Doherty. Today's guest is a leader shaping the future, not through business, but through education. Dr. Moody is Head Teacher of JFS, one of the UK's largest and most prominent Jewish schools, guiding the next generation through an increasingly complex world. He holds one of the most demanding roles in the community, leading a major Jewish school at a time of heightened sensitivity and scrutiny. Alongside that, he is also a young father, navigating many of the same questions and pressures faced by the families he serves. Not Jewish himself, he brings a thoughtful and deeply engaged perspective, speaking openly about how he has come to understand, connect with, and genuinely love the community he works within. Dr. Moody reflects WheatSay's commitment to education and enabling young people to reach their potential, whatever the challenges. At a time when young people are facing rising pressures, from mental health to questions of identity and security, his role has never been more critical. In this episode, we explore leadership in education, the realities facing students today, and how schools can become spaces of strength, resilience, and growth. Welcome to Impacting Your Future, the podcast with WheatSay. This is Dr. David Moody. And I'm joined by Nikki from WheatSay.
Hi.
And so, we just would love to talk to you, David, about your job as the head of JFS. I think this is probably likely to be one of the most listened to podcasts of our series. All the Jewish parents out there are keenly listening to every word you say.
Oh dear.
And just wanted to start really to talk to you about kind of what things have impacted your future, particularly around education. Did you always want to be a head teacher, work in education? What was life like for you growing up? Was that ever always on the radar?
No, it wasn't. I mean, I guess Dad was an ex-Marine. Maybe that's useful. No, what it was is... No, growing up, I just had a really nice childhood. I just enjoyed school, worked hard, and then it was when I was at university. I went to do a degree in natural sciences, and then I was doing some work placements in pharmaceutical companies, and I was also doing tuition at Cambridge. I was doing working with the undergraduates, and I just found I liked it best. So I was doing a PhD there. On a Tuesday, you'd always go down and do the work with the undergrads in the labs, and we used to get through it quickly. They enjoyed it. I enjoyed doing it, and then as the PhD wore on, I was meant to be applying for jobs in pharmaceutical companies, and I thought actually I really like the work I do with the undergrads, so I thought I'll apply to some teaching jobs, and so I'd applied to the I think it was a fast track scheme back then. And I thought,
a version of Teach First.
Yeah, like a version of Teach First. Kind of, it was there at the same time as Teach First at its inception. And so, I thought I'll go and have a go at it, and if I'm any good, I'll get on the fast track scheme, and if I'm not, then maybe I should be doing something else. But I did, and I just thoroughly enjoyed it, and I've always enjoyed talking to kids, and I think they're a good laugh.
And are there any teachers in your history that really stood out for you and potentially motivated you to doing it? Are there any people that in education who have really impacted your future and what you've gone on to do?
I think I was just, the school I went to, I think I was the first person to go to Oxbridge in 10 years from there. It wasn't a high-performing academic school, but there were a group of teachers, certainly at A-level, who were just really lovely and caring, and they were smart, they knew what they were talking about, and just that push towards it. It was never my intention to apply to Oxbridge, and then one of the teachers there just said, you're applying to Oxbridge, we'll help you fill in the application and things, and just from there, I feel like I was very lucky to have the people around me who I did, but equally a really supportive mum and dad. I grew up in a little grocery shop, and mum used to write little maths books for us and stuff, and you'd sit there as a kid just filling these in, and you'd be flying around the shop in your little stroller, and it was it was a very nice kind of family oriented way to grow up. And so I always felt really kind of lucky in terms of going through school, and I guess it was nice. I learned that, especially with maths, right, you get a sense of success from it.
Is that what your degree was in?
It was in natural sciences,
Natural
it was in chemistry, was what I specialised in. But that differentiation at school, it's maths or science, and it was just really good fun. I enjoyed it, and so I never really had a bad experience with education, and so it's really kind of quite straightforward to step into it when you've only experienced positive things.
And was it kind of a key thing in your family growing up? Did your parents really value it? And was it
so my dad had quite strong opinions on this. I remember it's 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. I may be wrong, but when I was going to go and train and be a teacher, he said, "What are you doing, son? You've got a first class degree from Cambridge and a PhD, and you're going to go and teach." I was like, "Yeah, I am, and I think it's going to be good fun, Dad." And I guess you're just part of a large intake of teachers, aren't you? And you just want to go and do good and
so
do nice things.
What was his expectation, that you would kind of go and do something a bit more?
I don't know. I think he expected me to go and apply what I'd learned, perhaps in a more in terms of science or whatever it was. But there was never any pressure at home. It was, Dad was Royal Marine, Mum was in the Wrens. They owned a shop for 17 years. Dad was then a builder and kind of craftsman and carpenter and the rest of it. And it was just all they want. It's all any parent wants, right? You just want your kids to be happy. And I think I was really fortunate in that respect, to have 2 parents for whom that was the goal. There wasn't a pressure to go and achieve something. I think it was like, you've done all of this, and why aren't you pursuing something that kind of utilises what you've learned? But I think at the same time, he looks back now, and both his kids are teachers. And he wouldn't have it any differently. I think he's I hope he's proud of us.
Yeah,
he says he is, so we'll take that.
Yeah, he says he is, that's good enough.
Yeah.
And what's so fascinating about you, perhaps, and you've talked a bit about your background, is you're not Jewish, but you're the head teacher of JFS, kind of probably the most well-known Jewish secondary school. How have you ended up there, and can you talk to us a little bit about that journey?
So perhaps in hindsight, I was the only person who'd applied who wasn't aware of the number of emails I would get. So, so we'll take that as a reason for stumbling into it.
Do you want to re-give your email out now? Just
not quite yet. So the question was, how did it happen?
Yeah, it's potentially an unlikely.
I don't know. So I grew up in a pro-Israel house. Dad being in the forces, I always had a massive respect for Israel. I was running 10 secondary schools, and it was summed up by a girl in one of the secondary schools. So I was running schools from Clacton out through to Richmond Park, but one of the girls in Richmond Park, she said, "A man with many wives has no home," and I just thought it was really, it summed up exactly how I felt, and.
Who said that?
A student.
A student.
Yeah, a man with many wives has no home.
Quite a thing for a student to say.
Yeah, she was a smart cookie, and so you just, and I thought, actually, do you know what? That really is true. And so I'd come from running a secondary school. I mean, we'd taken that from special measures. It was outstanding. It was world class. It was in central London. It was a real purple patch of your life, right? I mean, you're working long hours, but the reward is really obvious in that moment. And when you're across 10 secondary schools, the reward is less obvious. And the relationships aren't there in the same way. You've got relationships with head teachers, but you haven't got
not with the students.
Yeah, you haven't got it with the students. You haven't got it with the parents in the same way. And I thought, actually, do you know what? There's something to be said for a school. But then I'd run a really successful secondary school. I was running some really good secondary schools in the group. And JFS was quite unique. So I found out about one of the head teachers that was working with me at the time. He knew Dame Joan McVitie, and Dame Joan McVitie and Sir Michael Wilshaw were interim head teachers of JFS. And you think, a community that's got Sir Michael Wilshaw and Dame Joan McVitie as interim head teachers, this school looks interesting. And I visited on a Monday morning and in October. And I thought it looked like a school where there was work to be done. But it looked like a school that had a lot of potential as well, and it's unique, right? I mean, the community is exceptional, and the kids are brilliant, and so it's a real kind of pleasure to have found. It feels like it's not unique but there's a uniqueness about it.
And what did you know about the Jewish community before joining JFS?
Oh, I guess, look, a layperson's knowledge versus the knowledge that I've got now 4 years later is, obviously I didn't know as much as I do now. I knew a bit, but like when you, one of the things that you kind of take, you're sitting there and you're going into an interview and you think, right, what do I know? What do I want about this? It's the overlap between Judaism educationally in the school, and actually there is the tenets of the faith, if you like, are really, they overlap so much with the tenets of just good education, and that thread it allows you to weave through a school is a really lovely thing, and it's a richer place for faith.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've answered your question there.
Well,
I did GCSE, I know the basics of Judaism, whereas I feel like 4 years on, there are themes and tropes that kind of run through Judaism.
The personality of the community as opposed to just
it was all,
abstract.
it was ethereal at the time, right? It was out of context, and actually you look at the community, it's just one of the most exceptional group of people I've ever met. I mean, we had an open morning this morning, and you have 300 people in the hall, and they're there to see whether or not they're going to send their children to your school. But it's just important for everybody in that room to hear what an exceptional job they're doing. It's not, you come from secondary schools, I've seen so many secondary schools, and there just isn't that same community, there isn't that same tenacity of care, that same determination to ensure the very best outcomes for their kids, and that makes running a school a real privilege. And I think that was one of the things I had to learn, is that you normally, I'm very insular. I don't really network. I don't really work with outside organisations. Certainly when I was running Battersea, it was just a case of drawing kind of the curtains around the school, if you like, and just trying to build this brilliant school, and we did that, and it was lovely. But actually, when you join JFS, you realise very quickly that I realised very quickly that you can't exist without the community in JFS. It's so much better for having an open organisation, and I think that's been one of the nicest things to learn as I've gone through, is you're part of an organisation, but there's a generational love of JFS. You meet somebody whose mum went there, whose grandparents went there, whose grandparents went there, and you can't close off to that. You have to open up to it.
Yeah.
And so it's forced a change in me as well.
Did you find people welcoming when you came in?
Did I find people yeah, obviously, right? I mean, I say welcoming. I think there was a healthy degree of scepticism. The school had been through a number of different head teachers in short order, and welcoming, yes, but obviously there'd been a build-up of frustration as well. And so when I started, it was a case of, I gave out my email address to all of the families.
One of the things that I read about you prior to this interview, and just thought, wow, that was interesting. He must have had no idea at the time what that would mean.
I gave up my phone number as well, and so I'm sure if you want it, you can find it somewhere. But people have always been respectful of it. Look, when you take over a special measure school, there's, for whatever the reason it went in, there's people with frustrations, and they're normally accurate. It wasn't that they were inaccurate. Anybody who felt a frustration, they were right in many respects. And so it's just about listening to it. And so that's what I did when I started. And so welcoming possibly, and not even possibly, people were welcoming, but people also had a backlog of things that they wanted to talk about, and it was your job to hear. So I would say after that initial period of listening, you're there at 11 o'clock at night and people you're still on the phone to people. Once that had died down, what you found was just a lot of love for the school, and a real, there was people were pleased that it was moving in the right direction. I think about like Lord Levy, the president of the school, right? Obviously it's difficult when the school's in special measures, and it's a school that's got such history. People just want it to do well, and so once things had settled and calmed, it's not just a welcoming school; it's the most welcoming, kind, loving community that I've ever worked in. And I've never been professionally happier. And I think when people talk about, that girl who says a man with many wives has no home, I feel like I've got a home. And I think the hard part is that I was away from home for a lot of it, right? I was stuck in a hotel. We lived in North Norfolk, and I was in a hotel, and I was missing my family. And at the time, I remember saying, it's like I have another family here. And I think, I'd underestimated kind of the strain that was putting on home by being away, but equally being away from home was made much easier by the warmth and kind of the genuine care from people whose kids you were looking after.
And are there things about that you've learned about Jewish culture and traditions that have surprised you, or
people like to eat?
Yeah, people
My
like
God,
to
love
there's
to
a
eat,
lot
yeah.
of food, and trying to maintain a healthy diet working in a Jewish school is nigh on impossible.
What are the lunches like at JFS?
They're
Are they
good.
healthy?
No, they are healthy. We've had the same caterer for 26 years, and she knows what she's doing. No, they're good. They're the best school lunches I've ever had. But no, what have I learned about? Was that the question? Like, what have I learned about the Jewish community that resonates?
And in particularly in a school context, are there things that you think that really benefit in a school context that you've learned from the Jewish culture?
I think it's a more generic answer, perhaps, which is just that if you go into a non-faith school, you have just the normal tenets of a state school that you manage it with. Whereas whenever you go to do anything in JFS, you have the kind of threads of Judaism to weave through it. So when you talk about being kind, you don't just talk about people being kind, you're talking about rachamim and the notion of compassion and mercy, love for something bigger. Or when you're talking about people reflecting, and which is what you want for kids, right? You want them to think about who they are and improve and want to do that themselves. You talk about Teshuvah, and you talk about Yom Kippur, and there's moments and parts to Judaism that just make that a much more holistic conversation, and that's a real pleasure.
And presumably all these things are things you've learned about in the job, because I imagine you didn't know about those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
How did you learn it all? Did you have a quick tutor session, or did you just
so there's two directors
organically, or
there's two directors of Jewish life, and they try and keep me right. I think I'm allowed to speak in public now about Judaism, whereas for the first year there was always that tentative, Dave, you're going to mess this up.
You're allowed to use Hebrew words now in public.
I'm allowed to use some Hebrew words. I have Duolingo. I'm trying to learn my alphabet. I think I'm allowed to speak with no authority, but with at least they'll let me open my mouth about Judaism now. But in answer to your question, it's just I find it a very welcoming religion. I've experienced some other religions that I don't find as welcoming, and I think that the warmth certainly of the community brings it to life, right? I mean, I was at Kinloch Shoal on Friday night, and I listened to that service and just the prayer and the song. It's just lovely to see, and I think what I really liked about it was that you've got people, you can pretty much go from 0 to 90 in 4-year intervals, and you've got you could go around and you could say you're 4, you're 8, 12, 16, 20. It's not a maths lesson, I'll shut up, but you've got the whole generation in there, in the show all in song and prayer together, and I think that's really special. And the camaraderie, the warmth, the openness, the support. There's all of those things that are really evident as hallmarks of what the faith is.
And obviously, JFS being a faith-based school, how do you, and that's why parents want to send their children there a lot of the time, as well as them getting a great education. But how do you balance children being exposed to kind of other cultures and religions and...
I think it's just really important. I mean, the community itself talks about the bubble of JFS. You bus into JFS, you bus out of JFS in a lot of cases. People used to talk about running the gauntlet when JFS used to be on the Camden site, but it's when you run a school, all you really want is for your kids to leave, for the students to leave well and whole and like able to go and live happy lives and do so with a clean heart and just be able to make the right decisions for themselves. And it's in order to do that, I think you need to know you need to have an awareness of society and kind of where you are in it. So the notions of social justice, social inequality, things like that, I think they're really important for a school to do, as are other faiths as well. I think it's really important that that people leave just with a good round understanding of the world. That's what you want, right, for the children. And so it's. Do I think so? There is some interfaith work that goes on in the school, but I think we can do it better. And so, what's nice for next year is that we've got an interfaith program that we will weave through that. And the other thing we're looking at is, because what's your vehicle for it, right? So we're working with an organisation who will hopefully fund a B'nai Mitzvah program where if you're when you become an adult, what are the things that you should have under your belt as such. So do you understand what poverty looks like in terms of being at a homeless shelter, or have you been to a soup kitchen? Have you been to experience different faiths? Are you stepping into a shoal with an understanding of what a mosque looks like, or a church? And I think there are these not curated isn't the right word, but what have you volunteered somewhere for 2 months? In a build up to a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah, what are the things that people should do or experience that kind of broaden their horizons? And that's another program that we're looking at. I think that'd be really, I mean, I don't want to put too much store by it because it is the risk of over-promising, but it would be good to do things
to do more
like
of that. Yeah.
And also the soul searching, right? The part of growing up is being able to unpick yourself and understand what is good in you, but also what needs work in you. I mean, we spend our entire lives doing it, right? You're always most interesting people to know are people who are always just trying to improve themselves, and that's what people want for their kids. It's what I want for the kids in the school, and so there's that aspect of it too in terms of the character work and that we're doing. I feel like I've gone off task. You can bring me back to heal with another question.
It's quite interesting actually, because just to compare it to youth villages in Israel, our Weetzer youth villages, the last couple of years they've weaved into the curriculum a requirement that all the secondary school children have to do, I think it's 2 hours of voluntary work a week, which I think is amazing. So they, particularly in the north, they'll go out and they'll work on the farms and they'll help farmers, even just picking crops and that sort of thing. And it's all part of this whole concept, as you say, of becoming these rounded individuals who care about other people and not being too insular, and just making society a better place, to sort of use a bit of a cliche, but and I think that's one of the, I think it's a really important thing that schools do, is that it's not just, as you say, it's not just the academics, but it's also what sort of person you are when you leave at 16 or 18.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the things we've done is we've changed so in Kodesh you used to get a mark on how well you sat the exam, and now it's only 20% of the mark that you get, and so part of it is 20% of the mark is on social action, and so if you're volunteering you'll pick up more marks. And so if we're going to, if Judaism, if being Jewish and being a proud Jew extends beyond just the academic aspect of that, then it should be recognised. And so the marks that people get when it comes to the exam, if you like, it isn't just the exam. It's about respect in the school. It's about social action, being a positive role model, and then also the knowledge on top of that. So it's just trying to articulate those things to the kids as well as possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's so, I feel it's so important. I mean, I know obviously it's so hard, I'm sure, to fit it into the curriculum because everybody wants academics. But as you say, I think you have to look at, just looking at people as a whole, it's so much.
Yeah, but you get, I mean, it's the journey, right? So when you've got people who are often, what am I trying to say? Often people there are internal barriers in children that are sometimes the things that inhibit them most. And so when you have children who are working through those and coming out the other side, having worked through them, then everything improves as a result.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And so it's, focus. I've worked in schools, or not worked actually, but seen schools where they're just an exam factory, and you don't get. It's not something I enjoy. People doing well alongside kind of warmth and laughter, that feels like a much more wholesome way to be. Yeah. You need the whole person to turn up, right?
Yeah. And so, what does a typical day as a head teacher at JFS look like?
I have no idea. That's not a question that you can answer sensibly. 1 second you can be talking about a budget and somebody goes flying past the window and somebody else is in hot pursuit because they've stolen their pencil case, and you go and resolve that, and then there's a knock on the door and I don't know, a teacher's asking about a particular class or something like that, and then somebody else will knock on the door and there'll be a safeguarding incident, or the water's gone off somewhere. Generally there isn't a typical day. I mean, there are starts to the day. They generally look the same. You'll meet, you'll talk about behaviour, and there's the end of the day when the kids will leave, but then there's just everything else in the middle. But that's what's nice about it, right? It's so varied, and really It's the needs of 2,000 children. So a typical day, I feel like I've dodged an answer on that.
Yeah.
I mean,
what time does it start for you?
Well, it starts-
Because I think people don't have, like, they think of the school hours, but they don't necessarily
so there's
know
Mrs.
what happens either
There's
side
Mrs. Joseph,
of that.
who's always there at 6:30. When I was in a hotel, I would match her, and I'd be there alongside her. But because I live in South London now, it starts at what time does it start? Normally I'm on the 5:55. Get to school about 7:15, 7:30. That first hour and a half on the train is emails, sending out duty rotors, making sure people are in the right place for break and lunch, etc. Then there's normally a behaviour meeting where we discuss the students who have caused issues or there's concerns about at 8, and at the same time you've got the safeguarding team meeting and other people as well, just to make sure everybody's set up for the day. Kids come through the door from up until 8:30. We check their phone pouches. They'll go into a separate yonder pouch now so that they can't access those through the day, and making sure that uniform's sorted, etc. They'll come in. There's normally a little lull while people go to tutor time, or there's an assembly or something like that. And then it's lessons, and it's either a walk around school or a meeting, the local authority. You're meeting the local authority about finances, or you're talking about estates, or you're talking about computers or things like that, or you'll visit classrooms. You will often get called down to the behaviour room to see what's going on and deal with a particular student. I mean, I think last year I was down there for about 10 out of 24 periods, so a week that was a lot of the school, but that's fortunately a lot less. We've put a head of investigations in place, and then there's break. You go to break, you've got all the kids out in the Astro, and so it's just looking at 600 people and trying to keep them contained and happy, make sure that they're sorted for coming back in. Same again at lunchtime, and in the middle is normally just meetings of a variety. It's I guess at its core, it's 250 people working in a building, and everybody there's different people need to talk to you at different parts about what's going on in their life and what they can or can't do, and it's just about trying to be available for those conversations.
You mentioned that kind of making sure people put their phones away. What are some of the biggest challenges in terms of running a secondary school? And is that a big one? And is that something you changed when you came in, like the kind of young people's access to mobile phones and all of that? It's a big topic of conversation, isn't it?
So they're gone out of the school in terms of being able to access it during the day. Look, I'm sure there's some kids who are sneaky and can get into their pouches, but ultimately they should be away. I think that's a positive move. I'm always happy to work with year groups to agree a time at which they switch off their phones every evening. And I think that the sooner there's some legislation that brings everything under control, I think that the kids' lives will be better for it. I think it's really sad to see some of the addictions that exist to people's mobile phones. One of the worst things you can do behaviourally to sanction a child is to keep their mobile phone overnight. And some of the responses you get when that mobile phone comes away from them are eye-opening, to say the least, right?
From the children or the parents?
From the children. The parents want them gone in the main.
They do.
Everybody understands the risk, and nobody really has there isn't a clear way to deal with mobile phones in households at the moment. And I only hope, my daughter's 6, my eldest, and I hope that by the time she's 11 that there's more robust legislation that makes it easier for parents in place. But in terms of challenges in the school, look, behaviour is a challenge, but I love Jewish kids. Like they want to push the boundaries, but you also don't want to knock that out of them, because that kind of fight it makes for quite special adults, right? But you have to obviously have a school that is calm, and so that'll be an ongoing tension that'll haunt me until I retire. In terms of the challenges, look, it's down to finance. And when you talk about what a normal school day is, it looks like, I think it's hard because there's a cadence to the year. You start in September. That's about making sure that everybody's following the rules, that there's a clarity of expectation across the school. It flips over into then the monitoring. Are we delivering what we're meant to be delivering? Probably this time of year, it's about looking at timetables. It's about making sure that you've got the right staff in place for next year. And so I guess each of those comes with its own challenges throughout the year. We've got 340 Year 7 students starting next year. The challenge at that time will be to make sure that they start well.
Yeah.
That there's a coherency, that there's, I think the word is chevra, the notion that they're a group, that they're tight-knit. That's what you want for the children. And that takes effort to build. It doesn't just materialise by putting 340 people into the room. So that's a challenge. And then you get to October, November, you're looking at maybe some teacher will walk down and say that they're leaving. But it, in the back of your mind is always the budget and the finances.
Is that what keeps you up kind of most as a head teacher?
Yeah, I mean, when I arrived, we were $1 million a year overspent, and we're a PFI building, so we don't own the building. It's essentially a mortgage that's inflation linked, and so with inflation being what it has been over the last few years, we're millions to the bad because of that, and it's a lot of work to try and balance it. So when I first started, we lost a lot of teachers. We had to go through a restructure of support staff to try and balance the books, and we thought we'd done a good job, and then the war in Ukraine hit, and suddenly our costs went up again. So, yeah, the reason you always come back to budget as a head teacher is there's infinite need for these kids, right, in a finite resource, and you're always looking to try and maximise what you can do with the resource, and you always know that with more resource you can do more.
Yeah.
But that's, look, to the credit of many of the parents in JFS, they contribute by virtue of being a voluntary aided school, and it allows us to do a lot more. But I compare, and I feel really fortunate for that, actually. It always, you want to do more, but at the same time you compare to some state schools that don't have the parental contributions, and so it's a really tough time to be in education.
What are some of the kind of the most pressing issues facing young people themselves that you see like day to day in the school? Because you've done a lot of work around wellbeing when you took over.
Yeah, look, I think it's different dependent on the school that you're in. So you have different communities, right? And there are differences between the needs of middle class communities versus working class communities, and I would be out in Clacton, and it was more of a working class community. There, the issues were different. You didn't have mental health issues in the same way that you do in northwest London, and for obvious reasons, I guess. When you talk about like a hierarchy of needs, there were many families there that were on the breadline, and they were trying to make ends meet. And there isn't the safety or the space to start exploring yourself. And I think the difference in somewhere like northwest London is that there is it's a more middle class area, that the children's needs are met, the basic needs are met, and there's space to explore. That the problem is, in terms of exploring yourself, some people go down rabbit holes and they get lost in them, and it is a pressing need. I mean, I look at social media, I look at people's exposure to what is supposedly the right way to be, and the judgment against these really tough to live up to purported role models, and I just think it's a really difficult space to grow up in, and it is heartbreaking to see beautiful children think they're not beautiful, and everybody is beautiful in their own way, and yet they judge themselves against these almost idealized versions of false reality, right? Of what it is to be good, to be successful. And so I'd take the fights.
How do you manage that in school?
What I was going to say is I'd take the fights in Clacton, or that fight in Clacton about providing for your family and stuff. It's almost, I'm not for a second saying it's easier to resolve, but it's easier to understand. But then the mental health concerns and the anxieties and the places that kids can take themselves to through social media, it's really tough to watch, and it's harder to fix. And so that's the biggest challenge, I think, is people's internal battles sometimes, and you just want people to be whole, if that makes sense, and happy, and it's a challenge, I think, when you are exposed as you are to this world of social media.
Yeah, because what always intrigues me about a school like JFS, because it's so large, is how you do deal with these individual issues that people have. I mean, because comparing it, for example, to our schools in Israel, our Wheatso schools, we have different sized schools, and we have our very large youth villages, and we also have our smaller. For example, our school in Jerusalem, which is a vocational school secondary vocational school for students with educational needs, special needs, often severe psychiatric problems, and so on. And we're lucky in that in those schools we do tend to have specific counsellors. We have to have specific programs for these kids to make sure that they do manage to graduate. They're taught in a different way. Sometimes they're taught they have outside classrooms, they have specific programs, they do vocational subjects as opposed to this classic maths, English, languages sort of thing. But I often wonder how you deal with that in a school like JFS, which obviously it's a very large school. I'm sure that's a huge challenge to give children that individual attention. It must be hard to look at all the different problems, and I just wonder how you manage to cope with that.
I think JFS is big, right? There's 300 to 340 in a year group, but there's if you're in a class of 15 people or a school of 15 people in your year, and you don't get along with people, there's nowhere to go, and that's isolating in itself. So the size of JFS means that there's often, not always, but there's usually somebody for everyone. Right. And it sounds a bit cheesy, but
it's a place for everyone in a group.
Well, so at the end of October, we'll send out something to parents saying, did you feel like your children have settled? Have they got friendships? And in the vast majority of cases, maybe out of 300, 5 might not feel that was the case. Obviously, especially with year 7 and 8 girls, that can be an ongoing and fluctuational thing. But in terms of the individuals, like if you walk into JFS at lunch, right, people are either playing football, they're sat around talking, they're around the edges of the AstroTurf, or they're in the lunch hall, or in the theatre, the amphitheatre, wherever they are. You've got people playing chess in the library, you've got the people playing netball, and the rest of it. And it just feels like a normal school of kids having fun. Obviously, there's some people who are not happy within the school environment, and they're not. I think people think that the problems are picked up through a form tutor or something like that, but it isn't the case that you really have a meaningful conversation when there's you and 30 other people in the room. What normally happens is that people are picked up because they've produced less work in maths that lesson. The maths teacher will report it, and then what we've got is 4 full-time members of staff whose job it is to pick up those kids and talk to them, and they're supported by a number of what are called designated deputy safeguarding leads, or safeguarding leads. And so we've got 5 of those across the building as well. And so that team just work to pick up people who are struggling. And so that they're the team who have the individual conversations. There's also the SEND department and the key workers and the LSAs. There's another kind of 16 or 17 people there. And then you've got the pastoral team with another 3. And so there's just a big team of people who are there to look after people once that kind of need has been noticed. But the teaching staff as a whole are really excellent at noticing that. And we've got counsellors in school. We've got lead practitioners. We've got Jamie mental health practitioners as well who come in, and there's life coaches. There's a whole group of people who are there to support the kids. But that initial identification is normally from a classroom teacher who will notice a problem. But then what's good about the school and what we can afford to do is make sure there's a team of people to pick them up, and the children will tell us, right? I mean, we're a parent, so we had a parent write in the other day, and they just said, we think that so-and-so is struggling, not their own child, but somebody else. And so you pick them up and you have the conversation. And I think that's what's nice about the community, is that people are looking out for each other, and there's a genuine sense of care.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
To what extent, obviously, post October 7th, how have you seen that impact kind of students' mental health, and how do you help support them?
So there were people who were acutely affected by virtue of having cousins who were hostages or something like that. That there was it
really affected.
Yeah,
the
it was a place of
grief
in the first instance, and still is for many of the students. But I wouldn't say, in terms of October 7th, what we found is more people want to be in Jewish schools. And so those kids who are with us, those children who are with us on October 7th, they are cared for, they're a part of JFS as they always have been. What we've done is had a lot more, or what we've had is a lot more applications to JFS for people who've suffered anti-Semitism in other schools, and they've kind of come to us as a place of refuge. I haven't seen too many mental health issues because of October 7th. I think kids are pretty resilient. They're playing football at lunch. They're talking to their mates, and it's not. And so it's just trying to get that careful balance in terms of how we talk about it as a school. It's not about overplaying it, underplaying it. It's just trying to find that healthy balance of focus. And I think we've done all right with that. I think in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, there was fear. We had, the King was due to visit, but we just didn't feel safe. Like, you're never going to be safer than the day when the King visits, but it raises the profile of the school at the time when the school wanted it to be, the community wanted JFS to have a low profile. Which,
to me, to even say that sounds quite ridiculous. Like, we're in the UK, why shouldn't the King visit?
Well, because nobody really knew what was coming, did they?
Yeah.
I mean, October 7th happened, and there was
for you,
fear.
has that period been has it been eye-opening, or did you kind of anticipate?
Well, nobody anticipated that.
The kind of the security concerns around.
I think it's always been I think one of the most impressive organisations in the community is CST.
Yeah.
Right? I think the focus on security has always been exceptional. It stepped up, but actually what was in place was already very robust and strong, and certainly the school has always felt like a secure place. But it's just about being present and putting people's minds at ease. So obviously the buses that come into school, there's not a problem there. But I mean, for 3 months I was down on the high street every morning from 7:30, and you're bringing the kids up, and I got very friendly with the Costa staff there. We knew each other well. It was cold, but you just want to be a welcoming face for the students. We had security guards out as well who would do the same, and it's just trying to put people's minds at ease without trying to make people fearful, if that makes sense. But there was, it wasn't a pleasant environment. I would say from October definitely through to about March, there was a lot more anti-Semitism. I think it dropped off after that March. Maybe as the nights got lighter, I'm not sure. But there was one point where I was thinking of pulling the Year 11 intervention, which went on after school, because there was regularly something would happen on the way down to the...
And were you witnessing that?
So I
When you say intervention, you mean incidents, students?
Sorry, no. I mean, after school, people would stay and do revision.
Right.
So our teachers would put on revision sessions, and then they'd go home afterwards. The ones with the exams for the Year 11 group.
Yeah.
So no, I'm trying to think. I don't think I ever witnessed it kind of firsthand, but you definitely run into kids where they were coming up to report it to you, saying that things had happened, and that was happening on a couple of times a week, and you thought, is this safe to continue with this? But it did drop off, and I think what happened is I thought the police were superb in it. They take their time in a positive way. They have their facts, but I remember walking into Kingsbury Station, walking around the corner, and being 2 police there, and they were just waiting to arrest a guy who'd been verbal towards one of our students from the previous week. And so they'd taken their time, they got the evidence that they need, and then they were there waiting to pick him up. So they'd only took a few of those cases to, I think, get the message to people. And equally, the local schools were really, really good. We had a couple of incidents with students from other high schools and other secondary schools, and the head teachers couldn't have been more supportive in terms of sanctioning kids where there'd been issues with hours.
Yeah,
it's reassuring.
Yeah, it's reassuring. You do hear, because you do hear it's not a normal situation. Like, is it? You've worked at other schools, and you've probably not had those security concerns. So I just wonder what it's like. How have you adjusted to that? And is it something now that you kind of don't think about, and it's like it's just the new normal and it's accepted? Or what do you think about it? The fact that it is different for a Jewish school.
It's different, but it's not. It's a step up, but it's not. It's not. all schools have security, or certainly all schools that I'd worked in. And look, I worked in the middle of London and in Battersea, and you had your security guard there, and there were some parents who were fairly bullish in coming through the gate at times. But it's not. I'm really impressed by the security of the school. It's not something I would say that is because it's so good and always has been so good. I guess what you to your point, you adapt to it very quickly. I mean, it's just a.
But it's a shame that you have to kind of adapt to it, I guess. But
I'm not sure that there's anything to adapt to. I think it's
become natural to you, presumably.
But it's just another example of the community caring about the community, right? Which is that CST is able to support us in putting on better security than we would otherwise be able to afford, and all it does, it's there isn't a negative adaptation. What there is a sense of relief that you're not left vulnerable. You don't feel vulnerable in JFS, or I don't feel vulnerable in JFS. You feel protected by a group of trained people who are there to have your back if there's an incident, and that is a real reassurance, a really positive reassurance to have. So it's not a case of feeling negative when you walk in and you're having to buzz through all these gates and things like that. It's just, you just feel protected, and I hope that the students feel the same.
And have you had to have, presumably you've had to have talks with the students to explain how things have changed?
Yeah, so the police come in and they do that, and but again, it's about finding the right balance. It's not about breeding fear.
Yeah.
And the students have responded really well. So there's conversations about what to do if there is an incident. There's a maturity about our kids. They look out for each other. I think they've been deeply impressive. I think that I look at the way the school has responded to October 7th in the community, and I just think that it's brought people together more. And if look, they're very hard to pull positives from it, but one of the things that we've noticed is that there's more. It means more to be Jewish, and that camaraderie. Camaraderie isn't the word. It's just that togetherness and that looking out for each other. There's definitely been a sense of a difference from before
Your
October 7th and afterwards.
Studies teacher is at home shouting the relevant word.
Well,
I don't know what it is.
How would you say chevra again, right? Like that
Chevra,
notion
it means friendship and community.
Yeah.
Chevra is friendship.
Yeah,
that's it.
And what do you you've talked a little bit about it there, but what are the sort of skills that you hope every pupil leaves JFS with?
Oh, I want them to leave nice humans. So, somebody came up to me after open morning. He said, "My son's starting in September. What's the best advice I could give him?" I was like, "Just be kind." And that's all I want. I want people, assuming they've got the grades to open the doors to the careers that they want. You just want people to be able to love well, to know what they want, to be people who are seeking to improve themselves. It's not somebody that's going to hold up a barrier or a defence to feedback or lessons that life has got to teach you, because that's all you're doing, isn't it, right? You're trying to get through life, and they're 16, I'm 46, and one day I'll be 76 and they'll be 46, and we're all just trying to get along as best we can and have the happiest life that we can. So I just want them to have the tools for that. Do you think there's too much pressure on kids these days to get A's or 9s on? I know in our schools, parents will kill them if they don't.
I know. Do you find that a problem? Not every kid, not every child is. Yeah. We'll have that as our quote.
Yeah. But also when people talk about the success of the Jewish schools, I think I said it to the JC or Jewish News. I don't know which one, but it was just to thank also the legions of Jewish mums out there. I was told also to include Jewish dads, so to the Jewish dads, you as well. But to the Jewish parents out there who are really kind of pushing their kids and they want that academic success. So that's not a bad thing. I've seen areas where I've worked in schools where you put on a parents' evening and you get 25% of parents. At JFS, you're part of parents' evening.
The grandparents as well, probably.
Well, you put it out at 6 o'clock or whatever, and by 8 minutes past 6, you're getting complaints that people can't get a space, and it's that care and that level of intensity is good. It always needs to be moderated, right? But the conversation in the school is about just trying your hardest, and that what we want to see is effort. and that if the outcome of that is a grade 9, well, fantastic. But if the outcome of that is a grade 6, great. You've worked really hard for that. That's yours to own, and it's the fight that's important. It's the determination. It's the, when you're preparing for your mocks and the nights are short, and you've got the little lamp on at your desk, and you're there revising, taking pride in the act of that, or taking self-worth from the act of that, I think is where I would want the school to be. But is there too much pressure? Oh, I don't know. It's hard, right? Because
depends on the child, I suppose.
It does depend on the child, but at the same time, what's the outcome of that pressure? If the outcome is access to more career pathways that make somebody ultimately happier, you can understand the pressure, bearing fruit. And so it's for individual families to make individual decisions about the amount of pressure that's right for their kids and the focus.
And do you think education in this country is, not necessarily at JFS, but just generally is broad enough to allow for individual children's skills? So, for example, in Israel, we try with our WITSO schools, we try and look at different vocational subjects, so agriculture, astrophysics, or a huge hairdressing, cookery schools. We have a whole range for those children or students who aren't your sort of standard academic child. And I just wonder whether, so it's just to make sure that when they leave school, they have a vocation, they have a skill, if they're not somebody who, as I say, is a straight A student, or somebody who is that child who's going to go to university. And I just wonder whether you think in the UK generally, I know there's been lots of talk lately about apprenticeships and that sort of thing, whether you think there's enough access to different types of education here.
I think it's getting better. And I think, there's prior incarnations of education systems where you'd have to make decisions much earlier as well. And so I believe that people should experience as much as possible over the course of their education. When was the last time that you threw a javelin? It may well be at school, right? When was the last time that you picked up Shakespeare? It might have been at school. And so you have the responsibility of education is to give people as much exposure to as much as possible, but with the other understanding that people will want to specialise at some point by virtue of their own interests. And I feel the balance in that is right. I think that the rise of apprenticeships is a positive thing. I think that the issue with the education system is still that if you're really successful at school in the traditional academic route, you'll start in reception and you'll end up a professor. And not everybody is going to end up a professor in their chosen academic field. And so people get off that ramp at different times. And I just think the more options and opportunities you've got as people exit that pathway to professorship, it can only be a positive for the kids. And I certainly think the work around apprenticeships, the work about all of the vocational courses, etc., they're moves in the right direction.
And I've heard you say this before, but people, when someone like you comes in and does a turnaround of a school, people naturally, once it's performing well, naturally sort of ask the question of, so presumably you're going to go somewhere else and turn something else around. But earlier you were saying,
I was lying. I mean, this is ultimately me saying goodbye.
But how happy you were?
No, I am happy. I was laughing with the open morning crowd this morning. With a 1-year-old and a 6-year-old at home and the lack of sleep at the moment, I don't have the space to work out if I want any change to my career. But it's look, lightheartedness aside, I have never been happier in a school, and I've never been happier in a community. And so
so much so that you're considering converting?
I don't know if you'd have me, but in terms of JFS, I regularly think, what does retirement at JFS look like? And our tricentenary is in 2032. What a lovely thing to be a part of. And 2032, I'm going to be 51, and I've got 2 kids who are young, and there's a stability about being at JFS.
It would just be quite convenient if you
dad.
could move it to South London.
Yeah, obviously. So my wife's family are in South London. I think there might be a few complaints if I was to pick up JFS and move it to South London. But the commute doesn't feel. In terms of the commute, I get to answer all the emails that come in. It's a useful, quiet time. Yeah. So no, in terms of staying at JFS, there were times when there were conversations about being CEO of of certain trusts and things like that. But it's not something that, I don't know, it doesn't feel the adrenaline or that whatever it is, the desire to go and do that and do more is tempered by doing this but better, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And there is an attraction to walking into special measures schools and kind of
turning them around.
Well, it's such fun, right? You walk in and everything's a mess. But it wasn't the case in JFS. JFS was an atypical special measures school, but there's others where you walk into and it's just a really fun thing to do. I mean, it's a privilege.
Challenge.
Yeah, it's a challenge. But there's also a challenge to sustaining something over time and those incremental gains that make something a better school. And I'm really enjoying it at JFS. And I also work with an exceptional group of people. I mean, I'm here doing this, but Anna Joseph, who's the deputy head, would have every right to sit in this room and speak about JFS, and is just, well, she is an absolute pleasure to work with. She runs so much of the school and is so invested in it, and she's one of many people who are invested in the school, and the staff there care deeply. They're great to work with. I think they're a superb group of people, and it's in some ways people say you're staying, but really if I was going, you still have an exceptional group of people who would do a brilliant job without me. And the more stable the school gets, the more redundant I feel. There is just an incredible group of people in the school, and I don't know, I hope that people see how hard they work for their children. I've not worked in a school where there's the depth of academic rigour amongst the staff that there is at JFS. And yeah, Anna leads on everything that's curriculum and many other areas alongside it, and it's a privilege to work with them all. It's a privilege.
That really comes across from how you talk about it. You can see that it means something.
Yeah, well, it's really,
you're happy there.
Yeah. I'm happy there, and it's because there are so many nice people, right? There are really lovely people working at JFS, and that's it's not by accident, right? We want to work with nice people, and it's when we're interviewing new teachers, we is it the right fit for the school and kind of the same shared values. But once you've got those in the people that you work with, it is just a pleasure.
Yeah, and are there particular ways that JFS has changed you professionally or personally, that think like working there?
How has it changed me? Yeah, I've become more, but it's alongside more Jewish, definitely more Jewish. But at the same time, it's also alongside being a dad. It's very difficult to separate the two, and I'm just, I think I'm softer than I was. I don't know if the kids would think that, or even the parents, but definitely there's I'm more open. And
is that because you see your child, how that could be your child in 10 years' time?
Up, isn't it? Yeah, no, I do. I see my own kids.
5 years' time.
And so I think I'm more conscious of people's futures, but also, I don't know if that's quite the right phrase, but you can see your own children in some of the children in the school. But it's more, what is it? It's more just that there's I'm older. JFS isn't a school that demands a firebrand going in and ripping everything out. It was never that school. And so every other school that I'd gone to was in special measures. You weren't really working from anything. It was a lot of them were empty, if that makes sense. The structures weren't there. The standards were low. Whereas there were just a couple of things wrong with JFS, which was why I went in special measures. And so there's a more tempered version of me right. In JFS, and that's a nice thing. It's not fun to go in and be a firebrand all the time. It's nice to just have the meaningful conversations with people and the gradual change rather than the wholesale change that existed when.
Which must be really hard to go somewhere as a new person and just say we're changing everything. It must be hard.
It is. You'd normally take somebody else with you, but in Anna and some of the other members of staff, you just don't have to do that because there's people who feel the same, and that just makes it makes it a special place to work. Basically, whenever I talk about the school, I always talk about Anna Joseph, and I think that everybody should be drawing little hearts and sending them through to her, and all of the other people in the school who feel as passionately about it. And what's nice is there's almost too many to name, right? There's people who just come in on the staff body every day who just do a good job, and that's what makes it a pleasure to work out. Yeah.
Well, it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My pleasure.